I know that you're going to be blessed. The information is really, really good. And so it will help you, and I know that your heart is to be the very best parent that you can, and that's what God wants us to do. And so I'm thankful for what the Lord's going to do through this. So Mike, I think, is just getting wired up, and he hasn't had much of a break. We took him to lunch, and Cheryl said they went back to the hotel, and she took a nap, and he just studied. So he's been going. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that cocaine helps.
I'm a crack man myself.
All right, let me open in prayer.
Good evening again. So glad you all are here. It's been a joy to be able to spend this time with you all. You all are such remarkable people. We have loved visiting with you and hearing your stories, hearing about your families. And you all have a very special group here, and it's been such a privilege to be with you. Some of the verses that I'm just going to open with before we get started that have guided us in our parenting, one of my favorites is actually an interesting verse in 1 Kings, or is it 2 Kings? I can't remember. 1 or 2 Kings 3, verse 1. And it says, "And the house of David grew stronger and stronger, but the house of Saul, King Saul, grew weaker continuously." And I pray all the time, Father, make our home grow stronger and stronger continually. And you think about King David, God blessed his family. Jesus was born through the lineage of King David. God used him. And so we pray all the time that God would raise up our sons and that God would bless us to the 1,000th generation. That generation, we're praying for our children and grandchildren that are yet to be born. Another verse that has guided us is Lamentations, which is pour out your heart like water on behalf of your children. Pour out your heart before the Lord on behalf of your children. Prayer is one of the best things you can do for your family. And so when you feel weak, then you are strong. I am desperate for the Lord. I know how weak and frail I am, so I spend a lot of time on my knees praying for my sons and their soon to be wives, hopefully. One of is dating, and the other two are single, 17, still very young, and 18. And then another verse that I like is that the house is built by wisdom and by understanding, and the rooms are filled with beautiful treasures and riches. And what I believe that those treasures and riches in our homes is love, joy, kindness, respect, faithfulness, the Word of God, happy and healthy children running around, getting along together, having meals together, praying together, crying together, laughing together. We laugh incessantly all day long.
Because what I'm going to talk tonight is a system that starts off with thinking, then moves into some processes, and then it moves into some practices, and they all build on each other. But when you do them all from top to bottom, you wind up with a house that's peaceful, not full of chaos, and a joy to live in. And it's not based on what me and Cheryl did with 3 kids. All this stuff is coming from my experience with 3,000 children when I was an elementary school teacher. And so I had a chance to vet and a beta test almost everything I'm going to say tonight with all this with you guys before. So, I want to talk about our crisis?
Sure.
There we go.
So our eldest son, Michael, he was about 12 years old. And we'd just come home from church. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Mom," he said, "I'm not like you and Dad. When I grow up, I probably will not be going to church." And I was like, oh my goodness, my parents are missionaries. My dad was born on the mission field in the jungles of Bolivia. His parents were missionaries. The legacy, a Christian home, serving the Lord, the Bible, that my whole life had been built upon that. And here was my son turning away, basically saying, I don't want the thing that has been the most important thing to you. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And we had to really stop and evaluate, why is that the case? Why is our son turning away from this thing that we hold and value so dear to our hearts? And we began to realize we had made some pretty big mistakes. We took our son to Awanas, we took him to church, we had community group, but we had not brought this and talked this into our home. We thought he would catch it by osmosis. It's like, well, if I take him to church, he'll see us doing all these good things, that this is what he's supposed to be doing. So we became a culture, we developed a culture of words. So we began to tell stories of our life and what God was doing in our life. We began to talk all the time. We just began talking and talking and talking. I did something that I'm really good at, which is I ordered a bunch of books off of Amazon on parenting.
Like they were free, but they weren't.
And Mike began to teach. He began to share more and more of why. He began to answer the questions of why is church important? Why is Awanas important? And another thing we began to get rid of is anger, because we were parenting with anger and shame. And it was turning our son's heart away from us, and as a result, turning it away from the Lord. And so that has been at least, let's see, that was probably 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And our son has a heart for God. He loves God. He's dating a godly Christian girl. He wants his life to matter for God. When he was 4 years old, he said, Mom, he said, I want to impact the world. I want to impact millions with the gospel. And this is the child that he got saved when he was very young, and he was sitting in his car seat, and he goes, Mom, was Jesus the most obedientest person that ever lived? Yes, Michael, Jesus was and is the most obedientest that ever lived. Well, Mom, I want to be more like Jesus. So I knew that those seeds were planted in his heart. That was when he was very young. And then he came to the season of turning away, but thankfully, we were able, by the grace of God, to get his heart back, because we changed and we repented and we turned from some of the things that we were doing to turn his heart away from God. So that's what initiated this whole ministry, basically. And so we're going to share with you some of those things that we implemented in our home.
The truth is, by 13, kids have decided if they're going to go to church or not. And if they're non-rebellious Christian kids, they don't tell mom and dad because they know how important it is to mom and dad, and they don't want to hurt them. But by 13, almost all kids have already decided if they're going to go to college and then drop out. And we know that there's a lot of kids who drop out. So it's well more than half of them that do. And it was just God's grace that we found out at 10, which gave us a little bit of chance to do some course correction. But if you find out at 13, you still have plenty of time. Most of the stuff that we brought here, that we brought tonight, is basically mistakes that we have made. And our first run through of writing out this material was me sitting in the desert by a fire up on the side of a mountain, drinking insane amounts of coffee and eating Hershey's chocolate bars, and asking this question. It's like, what do I wish I'd known before I had Michael? And so I did this when he was about 13, 14 years old. I was like, man, if I'd known this, we wouldn't have gone through this. If I'd known this. And so that's a lot of the stuff that we cover. And so what I'd like to start off with is just a little bit of reality and level setting. So this is how people picture the Christian family, right? Everything's perfect. They got 2.5 children. The half child, he's out of camera, right? But they're the standard norm. But this is reality. This is what parenting really feels like, isn't it? It's like, hey, let's go ahead. And then they realize, oh, we forgot our matching shirt for the little baby who's upside down. And then I kept looking at this and thinking, man, that reminds me of a picture from like when I was a kid. And then I remembered that's what it was. So I don't know, maybe he'll be an astronaut, but he's definitely ready and he looks very relaxed in that position. So Christians have parenting struggles too. And why? Well, it's because Christians are people. We're just people. Everybody here is messed up in some way. Everybody's parents hurt them in some way, and everybody here is going to hurt their kids in some way, because you can't live with sinners without affecting everybody that's around. So we've all been hurt. We're all going to hurt other people. It's just how it is, but we want to have a relationship. We want to be able to heal and close wounds and keep growing. So that's the part about Christians being people. So if you're like me, you may have said some of these, because I've said most of them. I love my kids, but they do cause me a lot of frustration. I know my kids should help more, but it's just easier to do it myself. I would be embarrassed if people knew what our home was really like. My children are frequently disrespectful, disobedient, or sassy. And when my children do obey, it's usually with a bad attitude. Sometimes I get frustrated and then I say or I do things that I regret. I'm secretly afraid of losing my children's love if I'm too strict. And looking at other families make me feel like a bad parent. And sometimes I wonder, do they just have better kids or is it me? I have said most of those. That's how I came up with the list. So we're kind of all in the same boat. And this is how the world pictures us. I drew this with, I got AI to draw this. So this is your perfect Christian family. That's Dad in his obligatory blue Christian suit. And I don't know if you've noticed, but he's walking on water. You see him? So he's perfect. He's got his family out there. And they think that all Christian people have like these crazy Christian names. So you've got the little daughters, Faith, Hope, and Mercy. And then, of course, Obadiah, the new baby, because you have to have at least one Bible-named kid. Oh, and this is just for fun. This has nothing to do with parenting. I was messing with AI, and it will draw whatever you want it to draw. So this is late at night, and my brain, I'm just like, this is what happens to me late at night. It says, hey, let's just have some fun. Let's put a dragon in it that set the church on fire. And so it's, okay. And it actually put a hose in the guy's hand, which I didn't ask for, but that would be helpful. And I says, all right, well, let's change it up. Let's put it in the desert and have a rocket going towards the church. And it says, all right, I'll do that. And then it says, all right, how about a robot in front of the church that's attacking the church? And then I thought, you know what? Churches should be able to defend themselves. So I said, how about letting the church be able to defend itself? But as I looked at it, like the treads are awesome, the gun looks awesome, but the church is wood. Well, that's not going to stop anything. So I says, we need to up-armor this church. I says, hey, make it a little more technical so that it looks like it's more survivable. So it came up with this. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little cross on the top. So I'd call this the Church of the Ladybug, right? But no man's going to want to go that. And I finally said, all right, put armor on the whole church. Make the whole thing up-armored. And that's a church that I would join, right? Every man would be proud to drive that. And if the deacons got to drive it, there'd be 100 men on the deacon board. So that's just for fun. Let's talk about how great parents think. Because the way that we think determines what we're going to do, right? So if we think we can do something, you can. If you think you can't do it, you're not going to be able to do it. And if we can think like great parents do think, then it's going to up our game. And what George Barna did is he found 10,000, and I referenced this earlier today, 10,000 young people that had made it through junior high, high school, college, into adult life, never walked away from the faith, were involved in a local church, plus one other external church ministry, like Campus Crusade or something like that. So it had to be something that cost them either a lot of time, effort, or money. And then he said, what did your parents do? And he collected all that data. And then he went to the parents to cross-reference it, and he says, what did you guys do? And he pulled it all together, and he put it all together in this book. This is the one I talked about this morning. And he said, of all the things, if you boil it all down to one point, he says the biggest problem in modern parenting is a lack of intentionality. And so most parents, when they're not intentional, they do whatever Oprah says, or whatever The View says, or whatever the New York Times bestseller says. But there's a New York Times bestseller every 6 months. So they flip-flop from this parenting methodology to that parenting methodology, or they just do what their parents did. And sometimes they just don't basically do anything at all. And sometimes they will just let's just try something random, okay? What we want is intentional parenting. And if you can just get this, if this is the only slide that you get, this is the winning concept. Because intentional means you're going to watch your kids, and you're say, this is where my child is, but this is where I want him to be. And I don't know how to get him there, but I think this might work. And so you set them on that path, and then you watch and evaluate. And if you notice that they're not going towards the mark, you're like, okay, well, let's adjust. And that's intentional parenting. It's just basically, where is my kid, where do they need to be, and how am I going to get there? If you can do that, you're already miles ahead of a lot of parents. And there's 3 takeaways from these great parents. The first takeaway about how they saw themselves, and this is really important, is they saw themselves as coaches. So not mentors, not friends, not directors, not whatever. It was coaches. And the reason is because all of those good things I just mentioned are wrapped up in being a coach. Because a coach is a mentor, a coach is a friend, a coach is an instructor, a coach is a teacher, but a coach does something the other ones don't. Coaches will make you do stuff, even if it makes you miserable, against your will, in order to get something that you desperately want. And that's what coaches do. And parents are not their kids' friends, right? We should think of ourselves as coaches, and have all of those things wrapped up together, and we will have to make our children uncomfortable at times in order to get them the things that they want to have, which is to be respectful, obedient, get good grades, be hireable, right? So that's the first one. Second one is they know that relationship determines impact. And so relationship, if I came over to if I gave you advice right now on parenting, I don't know your kids at all. Now, I'd speak on parenting, so you might say he's got a little bit of credibility, but I don't know your kids. And if I told you something that sounded, I haven't earned that with you. And so with our children, we have to have enough relationship with them that we have earned the right to speak into their lives. Just having kids doesn't mean that those kids are going to listen to you. Now, we have God's authority over our children. That is absolutely true. But the children will say, man, my dad never talks to me. He never asks me questions. He never comes to my games. And now he's telling me what I'm supposed to do? Well, a 13-year-old kid is not going to be able to say, well, my dad has had all this life experience and I really should, and God put him in my family. That's not what kids are going to do. And so the relationship has to be strong. Has to be. And then the last part is that they have to be the real deal. And so if mom and dad are one way at church and another way at home, you've undercut everything. And now, but because children are very, very observant, but terrible at connecting the dots the right way, if you are one way at church and one way at home, instead of them seeing that that's an issue with mom and dad, they're going to say that's an issue with Christianity and that it doesn't work and this Bible stuff doesn't really work and it's not really true. And when I'm done, I'm out of there. I'm not going to go when I get to college. So it's coaches with a good relationship with parents who are authentic. And that authentic means being honest about your failures too, right? I have to tell my kids that I messed up quite a bit. And my kids have the permission to come and say, hey, Dad, when you did this, that hurt my feelings. Or when you did this, that made me feel this way. Or you promised this and you didn't do it. And then I've got to say, you're right. I did. And there's no excuse. I did tell you I'd pay you $7 and I didn't. And it's not fun, but my kids respect me because at least I'm real. I'm honest with them. I says, you know what? I blew it. So I like this quote. I'll be curious when we're done how many people have heard this. It's by Brennan Manning. The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and walk out the door, and they deny him by their lifestyle. That's what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. And I would change the last line is that's what our kids simply find unbelievable. How many people have heard that quote? Just curious. Yeah, it's made the rounds. It's profound. So this is our ultimate goal. Okay? What we want is we want children who are genuinely saved. And there's a lot of kids who grow up in Christian families that aren't saved. They go to church, they look like they're saved because they know church culture, but they're never really saved. We have to ask God to give us insight and to let that show what the real state of their spiritual being is, right? So we want them to be genuinely saved, and if they are, then we want them well trained. And if they're well trained, they're going to trust Scripture because they know the Scripture is reliable. Well, if they trust Scripture, they're going to have a biblical worldview. If they have a biblical worldview and they trust Scripture because it's true, most likely they're going to have a biblical lifestyle because they know it's going to be good. Well, if they have a biblical lifestyle, they're going to be noticeably different than everyone else, including the Christian norm. And if they're that way, it means they have convictions. Because people who have a conviction, they are an evangelist for it. They can't help themselves. And so they're going to be an evangelist, and when they do that, they glorify God. And if they're glorifying God and they're standing out and they're living a biblical lifestyle, they're going to change the world that's around them. And it may just be their little group of friends. Someday they may be the next Billy Graham. I don't know. But whatever it will be is they will have impact. So that's what we want, but you can't just jump here. You have to have a groundwork that's set before it. And here's the thing. If you want to make anybody feel guilty or ashamed, you can ask them about their parenting and their prayer life. Because we've all fallen short in that, right? We all have. And so if you want to make them feel guilty, just ask them about their parenting. And Cheryl and I have got a lot of things that's like, I regret this. And my first son, our beta child, right? We used to joke with him and we'd say, Michael, don't worry. When you get older, we'll pay for your counseling. We didn't know what we were doing with you. Well, the truth of the matter is we are now paying for some of his counseling because he's like, hey, I'm kind of having trouble with this. Will you guys help me out? And so we are. So you're not alone. And this is my favorite part. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. Because who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. If you pray God, it's like, God, will you give me insight into my child's heart? Will you help me be a better parent? And will you help me show my child how to draw closer to you? Can you imagine any possible way that God is going to say no to that prayer? Not a chance. So this is a promise from God.
Here's a bit of wisdom that God gave us. We only have 1/5 of that child's life to invest in. Think about it. You have 1/5 of their life to lay the foundation. So what Mike and I decided is he didn't take certain job promotions because it would mean that he would be leaving for a long time. And he decided, you know what, I've got this short amount of time with my sons and then they're gone. So we intentionally set up the first couple years of our married life where I wasn't involved. I wasn't doing this. Like, we left our two sons at home, 17 and 18. I would have never traveled and gone away from them because my number one calling was to rearrange my schedule and my calendar to be the best mom I could possibly be, to grab a hold of that heart and imprint it for Jesus. I was holding eternity in my hands. Their heart was given to me by God, and I wanted to be the very best steward of that heart that I was holding because I was going to have to live with the consequences of that for the rest of our lives. And so we didn't want to have any regrets. We wanted to be able to pour and pour and pour into those hearts so that when they're 25, we still enjoy each other's company. They still can't wait to come home and be at home and sit around the kitchen table and talk and laugh and dream and pray together. And then when they're 35, they can't wait to still have you in their lives. And so that is a bit of wisdom. If I can plant in your heart as a young parent, remember you have 1/5 of their life to pour into and to invest in them.
Yeah. We spent 18 years raising them, and then we spend the next 40 years living with what we raised. And she's right. I had offers. I was a technologist. I was a computer programmer. And I had offers to get, I could make $500 extra a week if I was willing to travel 90% of the time. But I just couldn't picture raising my son Michael on a phone from a hotel. It's like, I can't do that. So I turned it down. I lost raises. I didn't get promotions because of that, because I wasn't willing to travel. But it was easily a great decision. So we talked about how great parents think. Now we want to talk about how do you get to where you have a family that's peaceful, not chaotic, so that you can start working towards that pyramid. And it starts with discipline and respect. And this is one of my favorite stories. It's one of the best things that's ever happened to me. I was an elementary school teacher in El Paso, Texas, at the largest and fastest growing elementary school in the state of Texas. I was seeing over 3,000 students every 2 weeks. I was a music teacher, right? Super fun. Oh my gosh, it was so fun. The kids were adorable. I'm 2 years into it, and I'm thinking, I'm like hot snot, right? There's no kid who could, I have got this down. And on my third year, day one, 7:20 a.m., this little 4-year-old girl, and I'm going to call her Lupita because that was her name, okay? She comes into my class, and I am kidding you, she is this big, 40 pounds soaking wet if you're lucky. And I walk in, all the kids are sitting down, and I start trying to teach, and she's immediately disruptive. I go, okay. Now I'm thinking, all right, well, I'm just going to crush this, nip it in the bud. So I put her over in the corner, and I have her just stand in the corner. So I go back to teaching, and every time I would move around or get away from her, she would start wiggling around and turn around. So I'm like, oh, golly, okay, all right. So then I brought a chair So I made her sit down in the chair facing the wall so she couldn't turn around, which I told her not to do. And so then I do it, and I hear thump, 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 and she's kicking my wall, which is made of acoustic tile, which is super expensive. I'm like, wow, I can't believe this. So then I pull her away from the wall so she can't kick it and leave her in the chair. Go back, try and teach. This all happened in about 10 minutes, right? Trying to teach, and then I look over, and she's standing up. I says, sit down. And so she'd sit down, and I teach, and as soon as I look away, she'd stand back up. Now, all of these kids, they've never been to school ever, and they think this is normal now. So all the kids are now dialed into Lupita. Nobody's listening to me, and I'm like, what is going on? So I go grab Lupita. Nothing works, and by the end of the class, I've got like 24-year-olds and Lupita in one of those tiny little blue kid chairs, and because she keeps standing up, I've got my hand clamped on the top of her head so she can't stand up, right, and disobey me. And I'm thinking that's going to work. Well, that was day 1, and it got worse after day 2 and day 3. By October, we'd had our parents in for 3 parent-teacher conferences, and on the third one, they just finally cleared the air. They says, look, my other kids are normal. We don't know what to do with Lupita. She's not afraid of the dark. She's not afraid of strangers. She's not afraid of animals, not afraid of dogs. She's not afraid of snakes, rattlesnakes. They don't scare her. The only thing that scares her is getting a shot at the doctor. So what we do is we tell her, if you don't obey, we're going to take you to the doctor to get a shot. Now, I'm going to share with you the lowest part of all of my careers combined, okay? 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I check out of school, drive home on Montana Avenue in El Paso, Texas. 3:25, I'm in the parking lot of a large animal and feed store. My plan was to go in and buy the biggest horse syringe they had. That is exactly, and I had the whole thing in my plan. I was hoping to get one like this big, right? And I had a desk with the pencil tray. And I was going to put that syringe and close the thing, and I was going to call Lupita into my office in private and say, hey, Lupita, I got something for you. Come in here. And then I was going to open it up maniacally and let her see that giant horse syringe. But I started thinking about prison and what that could do to my career prospects as an elementary school teacher, and I didn't. So what I did do is I went to one of the principals who I was friends with, and he had a background in dealing with violent children. And so that was his thing, dealing with violent teenagers. And in the Clint School District at that time, they had corporal punishment, and they also had stuff like if a child was violent, you could use techniques to make sure you didn't get hurt that would stop them but not hurt them. Anyways, I try to take Lupita to the office, and she starts grabbing my hand, and she is trying to bite me. I'm like, oh, good grief. So I use one of those techniques, and I walk her down to the office with one of those compliance techniques, and she's like, drop her off at the office, go back and teach. And I go home, and I'm like, well, I hope that worked. Go to school the next day, and everybody comes in. I used to high-five all the kids when they come in, and Lupita doesn't high-five me. She just walks back. All the kids sit down, and Lupita is standing behind the class, and she's just looking at me. I'm not kidding, the entire class, straight in the eyes the whole time, and it's so creepy. I thought she was like, she is figuring out how to get rid of my dead body, right? She's 4 years old, she's going to kill me. But she didn't misbehave. She leaves, and I'm not kidding, I thought, first off, I thought she was demon-possessed. Okay, by this point, I was like, I think she has legitimately got a demon inside of her. Then she leaves that night, and what I was afraid of was like, is it possible that I made this worse? And I'm not kidding, I didn't sleep that night. I was like, this girl had me wrapped up, and I was losing sleep because of this, because I had a career as a teacher, and this 4-year-old, 40-pound person had derailed everything that I thought I was competent in, which I was really good at classroom management. Well, the next day she walks in, and I'm high-fiving everybody, and she grabs my 2 fingers with one hand and my 2 fingers with another hand and pulls it down to her mouth. And I'm like, she is gonna try and bite me. But she doesn't. She just started kissing all the way up and down my arm. Then she put this hand down, grabbed this hand, pulled it up, and started kissing all the way up and down this arm. And from that day forward, Lupita was the best kid I had in class. and she loved me. And it was a giant school. She would be way at the end of the school, and she'd see me walking down, be, Mr. Hay! And she'd be waving at me. I'd have playground duty, and she would be right there with me, and we would talk. And she would come by and visit me after class on her way home, and she'd bring me gum or candy. It was covered in sand, and she didn't speak English, so I have no idea what she was saying to me ever. I never knew what she talked about, but she would come by and talk with me for 5 minutes, and I would smile and say yes and laugh when she was laughing, and she became my best friend. And it changed my life. I do not know what happened in her mind, but I do know what happened is an adult stood up to her and her parents didn't. Somebody drew a line that she could not cross, and for some reason she loved it. And I do think that life is terrifying for children who don't know what the boundaries are. We don't like fences, but fences make us safe, right? You kind of want to push the fence, but you're really glad the fence is there. And I think something tricked in her, and it just changed my life. And that's why I came to the conclusion that children not only need it, but they want discipline. So 2 scriptures real quick. He who spares the rod hates his son. Now God could have said any word he wanted, but hates is the translation. And so when we don't discipline our children, it is as if we hate them. And then he goes on to say this, but he who loves them is careful to discipline him. And when I think of careful, I mean full of care. If you were here this morning, my one son, the brainiac, man, he needed to be scared. My middle son, he is so tender. Just looking at him was all I needed to do. And the other son, he basically never caused any problems, hardly at all, right? So I had to discipline all of my children differently. So I had to be full of care how I handled it, but I had to discipline all my kids. And the second part, Proverbs, is do not withhold discipline from a child. And so what would happen if you withheld food or oxygen or water? Yeah, that whole prison thing, right? But the idea is if you withhold discipline from a child, you are hurting them. And a child, and we have seen it, we used to be chaplains in an apartment complex, and there was this poor woman, she worked 2 jobs. Her kid had some sort of like bipolar, he had something going on. And it was just a shame watching them because they just ran wild. They had no discipline. And I just remember one day and say, these kids' chances are so low because they're not getting taught anything about self-control. They don't know anything about how to control themselves. They can't manage or organize anything. And it was the lack of discipline. So this is hard. And the more parenting we do, the more conferences, and the later they get, we're seeing this more often than we used to, much more often, is it's parents who think that discipline is something they're doing to their kid. Well, it's not. Discipline is something that you do for your child, not to your child. But this is a huge, huge roadblock for some parents. And it was for Cheryl for a while. And so this is something that we do. If we don't do it, we hate our children and we're withholding from them. So discipline is a gift. Has anybody seen the Tim Hawkins video, The Gift of No? Yes, it is awesome. Greatest parenting video ever made. So if you can remember it, it's the Tim. Cheryl, could you help me to remind me? And so if they sign up for this, I'll send you a link to the video, The Gift of No. It'll be worth just getting it. It's great. So there's 2 keys and there's 2 rules on how to set up this home of peace and discipline. And what we're trying to avoid is this. Well, it seemed like a good idea. Okay? So I'm going to tell you some stuff that works beforehand so you don't have to do this. So 2 keys are this. First one is the discipline is discipleship. If we get our head to that it's not punishment, we're not punishing our kid because they pinched, we're discipling them because they need to be peaceful, gentle people. We're trying to disciple them and to train them up in godliness. So we're not punishing. It's not exacting revenge. They're not paying their price, right? We're not exacting a price from them. It's a chance to disciple them. And the second one, and God's goal, is actually heart change. Behavior change is easy. Hook all your kids up with a shock collar. Every time they do something wrong, just zap them, right? That was I don't like your tone, right? Give those Cheerios back, right? You can change behavior just with fear.
One of the ways that you discipline your children when they're very, very young with the whole goal of heart change is like this. This is an example. You have a 3-year-old and you take your little 3-year-old to the park and she's walking underneath the slide. And she looks under there and all of a sudden her face brightens up. She's so excited. She just found a piece of gum. Now it's chewed and it's stuck to the underside of the slide, but nonetheless, she doesn't know that that's wrong. Okay? So remember, little ones' heart. How do you keep their heart when little ones are doing things that they shouldn't be doing and you need to address it with them? So you immediately yell out to your child, Susie, no, don't do that. That's gross. That's terrible. Stop it immediately. And she sees the scowl on your face. She sees that you're upset. You're actually more afraid than anything that she's going to grab it and put it in her mouth and get some kind of virus or disease and die. And you run over there and you grab her and you pick her up and you are talking to her very firmly. No, Susie, do not do that. Now, immediately, Susie senses something happens in your relationship. There's a breach in your relationship. She senses that what just happened caused a disconnection. You had a disconnection between the two of you. Now, the important thing to keep the heart of your child, and in this case I'm talking about the little one, the very little one, is you immediately need to reassure them and bridge that gap and bring back together the connection that you had before when everything was wonderful and happy. So you say, Susie, I love you so much, and what you were going to do was very bad. That gum is dirty. It is full of germs, and you could put that in your mouth and get very sick. I don't ever want you to do that again. But you know what, Susie? It doesn't change that I love you so much, and I will never stop loving you. So what you did is you did 2 things. Number 1, you reaffirmed your relationship with them. And number 2, you didn't fill them with shame. Because if you had left little Susie, you stayed at your seat, you left her under the slide, and you corrected her for chewing the gum, but then you never went over there to bridge the gap and to reconnect her heart with yours, what do you think would have happened? There would have been a disconnection, but even worse, there's another thing that would have happened. She would have made the connection that she was bad. She would have been filled with shame. And that's how a child begins being filled with shame, which will multiply all of your problems. If your child, when you discipline them, begins with the shame is, I'm bad. Not what I did is bad. I am bad. So that's why when you discipline, you need to discipline in a way that keeps their heart close to yours. Because you don't want shame to enter, because that will be the voice in their head the rest of their life, and it will guide them to make very bad decisions. Mm-hmm. So remember, when you discipline your child, immediately go after their heart and bring it back to yours.
Yeah, that's good. So our part, and Cheryl just kind of alluded to it, is, I don't know if anybody here has ever thrown pottery, but when you start off, the clay is cold, it's hard, it's not soft at all, and you can't do anything with it. You got to sit there and work it, warm it up, and the key is you got to get all the bubbles and any sort of impurity out of it. Any stick, any stone, or any dry piece of clay, you got to get rid of it. Because if you don't, when you put it in the kiln and you fire it, it's going to crack. Our job as parents, in that 20% of their lifetime, is to get their hearts to where it's soft, pliable, without bubbles, sticks, or rocks. We just want pure and quiet and pliable. And then God's the one who throws a masterpiece. Because you don't know what your 14-year-old's going to do, but God does. So our God is to get them in a place where they can respond to God and be what He created them to be. So there's 2 rules. That's me on the left, standing in front of the drummers, and that's from college. And in college, and yes, that's right, it is a members-only jacket. I don't know if it means anything to you, and red high tops, but I was a smoke show back in the day, okay? But the guy on the right, that's Dennis Fisher, and he said, he gave me a lecture, and it's, I think, the only lecture I remember in all of college, but he said 2 things that changed my life, and I used it immediately on those 3,000 students that I was going to teach. And this is what he said. He says, rule number 1, and the context for this was I was about ready to student teach. So I was going to be a band director, so I was going to be looking at 200 kids with trombones and snare drums and trying to control them, okay? And he says, rule number 1 is do not smile for the first 6 weeks. Here's the reason. It's because respect comes before affection. I wanted the kids in the high school to like me. I wanted all my students to like me when I was in elementary school. But can you think of any person that you really like that you don't respect? Probably can't. Respect always comes before affection. And so the kids have got to respect you if you're ever going to be able to run a classroom and if you're ever going to be able to have a good relationship with them. So that's rule number one, don't smile for the first 6 weeks. And the second one's be firm, fair, and consistent. So firm, it means that whatever you do as a consequence, in their brain, it has to be, that wasn't worth it. I'm not doing that again. My son, the one with diaper, without diaper, if it was a hard daddy spanking and a diaper, he'd have taken it because it would have been worth it. So that's not a deterrent. It has to be a deterrent. Second one, it has to be fair. And if anybody here has more than one kid, you know you have one kid who is just way easier to raise than all the rest. And it's really tempting to let that kid get away with stuff that other kids don't. But all the other kids are watching. And so you have to be fair across the board. And then the consistent part, and this is hard because we come home and we're tired. But consistent means when it happens, we need to kind of step up. And a lot of times you got to dig deep and say, God, I am not up for this. Would you please help me to do this and help me do it in the right way? So firm, fair, and consistent. And don't smile because we're trying to get respect. And when you have them, rule 1 and rule number 2, it gives you respect. And that's what I mean. So respect means a child has a healthy fear of its parents. And healthy is the word. So and what it basically means is they know that mom and dad are not to be trifled with. So I can do a little, but there is a point where it's like, okay, do not mess with mom and do not mess with dad. They have to have that. And I saw a great story by a little kid. He says, when my mom tells me what to do, she's crying wolf. I know she is. He says, but when my dad tells me what to do, I get a warning, and then he becomes the wolf, right? Mom, you have to be able to be the wolf too, right? So everybody has to be able to be the wolf when it's needed. Now, you can have too much of a good thing, and I live in a military town, and we have met a lot of parents who really think that they can run their family like a drill sergeant, and they think kids should be like this. But there's no kids like this, okay? That's an unrealistic expectation. But what you can get if you're overly strict and you don't have a lot of relationship with your kids is they will respect you and they will obey, but there won't be any affection. And without affection, you can't speak to their heart. Also have a tendency to be cruel, kind of harsh, and those environments really kind of speak to your love is conditional. You'll wind up having high-performing outliers, don't have great people skills a lot of times. And in the Christian world, if you want to create a kid who is addicted to porn, you have a ton of religious rules so that there's a whole bunch of shame wrapped around this, and you have no relationship with your kid. And now they're drawn by it, they stumble and they fall, and almost all of them are going to, including the girls. It's now 60% of girls today are still having trouble with the same idea, with the same issue. But who can they go to? They can't come to you because it's all religious rules and no relationship. And so now it becomes a secret and then it grows. So you have to stay open with a good relationship. So we feel like there's a dichotomy. Should I be strict or loving? But I just want to posit this. I think that we're supposed to be strict and loving. And all of the data points to if you're going to err on one side or the other, too permissive or too strict usually works out better. In fact, it always works out better. Unless it's way too strict. You can go too far. But if you're going to make an error, too strict is the way to go. So, is everybody hanging on with me here? Because we're about ready to transition. Okay. So now let's talk about practice. And what we want to have, this is something we made up. It's called the grid. And this is a framework. You can use this as a 2-year-old or a 20-year-old. And its goal is to be able to correct something, whether it's an attitude or an action, without turning their hearts against you and without you losing their ear, so that you can still have that relationship. And this is how it works. The first one is, my son, the middle one, who's so kind and gentle, was an absolute stinker for a little while. He was 4 years old, and he was like a ninja pincher. And he would pinch his brother. Chase would do something, and we would just hear the crying, and we never caught him once. I don't know when he did it. We never saw it, but you could see the bite mark in his arm from the nails where he did. And it was like, we said, Lucas, you got to stop doing this. And we did things and things and things. He says, next time you do it, you're getting spanks. Don't pinch Lucas again. Don't pinch Chase again. Well, he did. And so this is how it works. Guilt, now I'm not talking about shame. Guilt is a legal declaration. Okay, and this is what you want the child to know, that they transgressed the law. And so you say, Lucas, why are we here? I pinched Chase. Okay, did you know that that was wrong? Yeah. Okay, well, what's going to happen now? Spanks. That's exactly how it sounded, right? So at that time, we gave him the spanks, and of course he starts crying and that kind of stuff. And at this point, he knew that the reason he was getting spanks is because he pinched Chase. He knew he wasn't supposed to, and he did it anyways. And I told him he was going to get spanks, and so now he's getting spanks. And that's where firm, fair consistency comes in. I told him it was going to happen, and then it did. I didn't like spanking him, but we needed to. So the goal there is that they know that it was their choices that caused this bad problem for them. Once you are done, it's immediate restoration. We've heard people say, after you discipline your child, you should banish them to their room, because what you want them to know is that that's what society is going to do to them if you break the rules. Well, that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is Satan, who is the tempter, you just send your kid to the room, and now Satan goes to the accuser, and he's going to tell him, you are a lousy little girl. Nobody's ever going to love you. Your sisters are way better than you. Your parents probably don't even like you. And you are just a dirty, rotten lobster. You are no good little kid. So that is not what we want. After you're finished with the discipline, you just hold them. Hold them until they let go. And you know they're finished crying because they always do the right? And then when that, once you get to that spot, this is now the golden hour. This is your chance. You say, I am glad that's over. How about you? Because you want them to know you didn't enjoy this. So I'm glad that's over, aren't you? And they go, yeah, I'm glad that's over. All right, well, let's talk about it. And so now we try and inspire them. I mean, Cheryl is great at inspiring. That was her spark. Does mom or dad love you any less? No. Does God love you any less? No. And then you try and speak into their character. Lucas, you are a boy with a noble heart. You are gentle and you are kind. But you just pinched your brother, and that's not noble. Now, that's not who you are, but you have to stop doing that. You can't be a pincher. If you're a pincher, what's going to happen? Are you going to have any friends? No. Do you want to have friends? I do. Should you keep pinching? No, I shouldn't. So maybe we should do something else. And then it's time to disciple, and this is where you go. Well, Lucas, what would have been better? I know Chase made you mad. I don't know what he did, but he made you mad. What would have been a better? And then you just let them answer. Just let them think it through. So, I should have told mom. Okay. If you had told mom, what do you think would have happened? I wouldn't get spanks. Right. You wouldn't have. And then when they're older, like some issues are more complicated. Well, how can I help you with this? So especially when it's an attitude type problem, those things are much harder to clear up. So the goal, is to train up a child in the way he should go. And so just a quick aside, to spank or not to spank, Scripture is clear. Absolutely, it's okay. Abuse is never okay. But when Barna interviewed his 30,000 people, this is very interesting to me. 50% did use corporal punishment and 50% did not. So you don't have to, and you can still raise an amazing child. However, I do think that there are some times when it really is kind of your best route. Because there's sometimes you can't sit there and reason with your child, like at a funeral, right? Or something like that. There's just times it's like we need to kind of take care of business fast, and then we'll talk about this later. So we spanked Michael more than all the other kids. And as we went down, as the kids got older, we spanked them less and less and less. And I can remember spanking Chase a single time, Lucas 1 or 2 times, and Michael maybe a half dozen or a dozen. But Michael was also pretty hard to raise. So okay, you guys ready for some pro tips? So these are things you're going to face if you haven't faced them already. And the idea is called horse training. And what it is, it's a laser-like focus on a single behavior or an attitude. And so as your kids become 13 and 15, a lot of times it's attitude that's really the problem. Say it's ungratefulness, okay? And you know it's time when in your heart and in the heart of your spouse, you go, man, that is it. We are through with blank, okay? I don't care what it takes. We're going to do whatever it takes, but we are done with this. And you've kind of realized we've tried everything, and now it's time to go. It's time for the nuclear option, okay? So what you do is you have to commit 100% to the goal. And it's like we are not stopping until this is addressed. And when that's happening, you got to kind of let off on the other stuff because you don't want to be riding them for every single thing. So if it's horse training, you're just focusing on, I am watching for this thing. And you're just on it like white on rice. And you have to explain what's happening to the kids. You say, guys, me and mom, we need to apologize to you. We have allowed you to be very disrespectful. And it is not going to serve you well because someday you've been disrespectful to us. You're going to be disrespectful to your boss or to your wife or to your husband. And that is not right. And we should have talked to you about this a long time ago. But God told us that we need to fix this. And from now on, the next time I see disrespect, this is going to happen. Every single time. And if I see it again, it's going to happen. And if I see it again. And we're sorry. We should have taught this to you when we were earlier. But we didn't. But now we are. And we cannot have this anymore. And it stops today. Because people don't like when you change the rules on them, do they? In the middle of the game and they change the rules, everybody gets mad. And that's what you're going to do to your kids if you go into horse training because you've allowed it and now you're saying no. So you got to let them know. It's like, hey, we're part of the problem here. We've allowed it, but we're not going to anymore. And you've now drawn a new line in the sand and now it's their choice. How do they behave? And count the cost. Like I would not do this if you're on your way to Disney World, right? Just wait till you have time to do it. And what's surprising is most stuff clears up in a couple of days or a week, really, once they find out. And with our kids, once I said, it was funny, one time I says, guys, I think we might have to do some horse training on this. That fixed it. Never had to do any horse training, but they knew Dad's not to be trifled with, and so just mentioning horse training, so well, we might as well just give up now, because what is it, resistance is futile? Star Trek quote? Okay.
I also wanted to say that you can spend a lot of time doing preventive work. So what it looks like is this. So you can take time to prevent a lot of problems that happen with your children. We had our little boys were all starting to bicker. They were probably 4 and 3. They started bickering. They were in a season of bickering, always arguing, fighting over this and that and the other. And I decided that I was going to do horse training, but the way that I was going to do horse training was through inspiration. So I sat him down one day and I said, Lucas, Jason, Michael, I want you guys to read this verse with me. And I read Psalm 133, 1-3, which says, how wonderful it is when my brothers live together in unity. It's like precious oils running down the beard of Aaron and onto his robes, and how the Lord's blessing is on those who live in unity. And I read it to them, and while I was reading it to them, as soon as I finished, I took out all my essential oils. So how many of y'all are into essential oils? Okay, so I took out the lavender, the ones that smell so good, the lemon, the grapefruit, and I started passing them around, and I was like, here, put a little drop, smell it. Doesn't that smell amazing? And I began to tell him, when you are living in unity, when you and your brothers are getting along, this is what you are like to the presence not only of God, but to everybody around you. When people see that you're fighting and you're carrying on and you're causing chaos and you're being selfish, I said, you're the exact opposite. And do you want God's blessing on your life? Don't you? And I described blessing. What would it look like? Blessing would be that, maybe on Friday night, instead of us having to put you to bed early, we have a movie night and pizza. That's blessing. Maybe you get to stay up a little bit later. That's blessing. Maybe we get to go out and get you an ice cream cone after church on Sunday. That's blessing because you are living in unity. And let me tell you, that completely changed the dynamics in our home. All I had to say is I had to pull out the essential oils. Do you guys want to be blessers or stressors? Do you guys want the blessings of the Lord? Are you going to live in unity? So a lot of the work that you can do in your horse training is preventive. You can spend 80% of your time casting a vision, holding the standard up really high until, like I said earlier, we changed and we became a family of words. And we told stories like that so that they began to realize, oh, I want to be one of those people. I don't want to be one of those people that's always fighting with their siblings. I want to have the Lord's blessing. So that is also a tack that you can take with horse training.
That's good because that ties into my next point here. So let's talk about tantrums. This is one of those things, and so you can do this with tantrums, but you can also do with other behaviors that you know is coming. But everybody has seen this, and you're just mortified for the parents, right? You just feel so bad for them. And some parents, they stick it out. It's just like, man, good for you. You're doing the right thing. But you don't have to do the tantrum thing. This is what we did, and we were preemptive. Cheryl and I had both decided, because Michael was 2, and we knew it was coming, the public meltdown, right? All kids tried it. I can't blame them. I would too. I'm sure I did, right? But we knew it was coming, and we decided that no matter where or when, we are going to take them home, discipline them, and then take them back. So we're at Barnes & Noble, and we're playing at the trains, and I say, okay, Michael, hey, we got to go. And he goes, no. For the first time in his whole life, I'm like, ho, 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 ho. All right, I think this might be it. I go, Michael, we got to go. He said, no. And I lean down real close. I go, Michael, if you don't come with me right this second, I'm going to take you home, and I'm going to give you a spanking you will never forget. And he flops on the ground like a wet noodle. And so I'm trying to pick him up, and he's like, right? So I'm like, oh, this is it. This is the tantrum. We've been waiting for this. So I picked him up, and now he goes from wet noodle to a stiff board, and he is kicking like crazy and screaming. And I'm trying to hold him here, which you should not do if you want to have more kids, right? Turn the kid around and put him over your shoulder. So I carried him out like a 2x4, and he's kicking and screaming, but I'm not getting hurt. Everybody's staring. He has, it was just gross. I don't even want to describe it. We get him into his car seat, and he's like, hey, Payne, I'm driving home. Hey, Payne, hey, Arby's, I like Arby's, right? And we're driving home. But the second we pull in, the driver's like, don't want spank, don't want spank. Weird. He just like checks out for a minute, right? Go in, we give him the spanking as promised, put him back in the car seat, drove all the way back to Barnes & Noble. I walked him into Barnes & Noble, said, play with the trains. He plays with the trains for like 5 seconds. And then I say, Michael, it's time to go. And he put the trains in, I put my hand out, and we walked out. Well, lesson learned. He never tried it again, and said one other time he hid in the playpen in McDonald's. But the thing that was funny is I would call into, and he just wouldn't answer, like he's going to pretend he couldn't hear me. But I could see him because the sun was behind, and it was yellow in the plastic, and he's just sitting up there, and I can see him. So I sent the 6-year-old, I said, hey, do you see that kid? Tell him he'd better get down here right now. So he comes down. So we go ahead and we train Michael. And by the way, this is just in from the CDC. I didn't tell you guys this. Tantrumitis. This is a serious condition afflicting children and men working on plumbing. Okay? Tantrumitis can rapidly degenerate into tantrumitis gargantuous if not treated promptly and with vigor. So tantrums do not have to happen. They're probably going to happen once, but it doesn't have to be a recurrence. And now here's the next best tip. Buy one, get one free. Lucas and Chase are about 2 and 3. And guess what story we started telling constantly? The story of Michael's Barnes & Noble experience. Now we asked Michael's permission, because we didn't want to shame him. He said, yes, you can do that. And neither Lucas nor Chase ever threw a tantrum. But it's because they knew what happened to Michael and they learned from that experience. So it really was a buy one, get one free. And now we'll talk about a couple other things. This is one of my favorites. As they start getting older, like 10 or 11, I just say, okay, change my mind. You don't want to go to bed now, tell me why not. And if you can change my mind, I'll let you stay up. And what it does is it gives them practice for speech and debate, critical thinking, putting together an argument, and you would be surprised how many times my kids actually talk me out of it. because I was looking for a chance to give them a win. I want them to know they have agency in the family, that they're not just some voiceless person, that they can actually say, hey, this is what I want to do. This is what I believe. And there are a couple times it says, I don't think this is going to work, but we'll try it. And if it doesn't work, then we'll go back to this. And then sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. So we tried to give them some wins, and it shows them that we're reasonable and that we will listen. Well, what does that do to their heart? Keeps it soft. What does it do to their ears? It keeps it open, because I'm listening to them, so they will naturally listen to me. Now, we'll talk about a couple that are more fun, all right? That, by the way, that's not paint. That's glue. So that poor kid on the right, he has glued his eyes shut. He will never see again. It's tragic, okay? So children are going to be childish. I remember my dad, he used to punish me when I spilt the milk. And then I didn't get any milk for the rest of the dinner. It wasn't that I was spilling the milk on purpose. My hand-eye coordination was terrible because I was like 4.5 or 5. And I'd just reach up and I'd forget that my cuff was going to catch the milk. So I would get punished for that, but that's basically just childishness. And so in this case, and honestly, tell me who's wrong. The kids who are exploring the gallon of Elmer's glue left by the crib, or the mom who left a gallon of Elmer's glue by the crib, right? So don't be childish. And then here's one of my favorites, empty threats, okay? This is the example would be, if you don't stop whining, I'm going to take you to Walmart. We're going to sell you to another family. Well, you're never going to do that. And your kids know you're never going to do that. And so if you're going to say it, make sure you do it. This is the let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. So no bluffing, because you don't respect a person who says stuff they don't follow through with. And you have to have respect. And so this one is not fun, but we can never, ever lose it. Now, kids can be super frustrating. And if you feel like you're going to lose it, it is much, much better to just send them to their room or for you to go take a walk or whatever it is. But if you do this, who's really the transgressor here? Granted, maybe it is the 5th time she's missed curfew. Well, you need to up the consequences for missing curfew. But this is not going to keep her heart open. Is she ever going to go to him when boys start pressuring her to do things she doesn't want to do? No chance. All right, so we cannot do this. It's a fool that gives full vent to his rage. So we must keep control. And one last one, and this is different than all the rest of the slides, and I did it on purpose. Shame is, we can't use shame, because Satan is already going to shame your kids. So we do not want to use that. What we talk about is a child's behavior. Shame is an attack on who the person is. And I explain it to my kids this way. The Holy Spirit says this, it says that is not the way that a child of God or a princess of God acts. That's not what you were created for. That's not the type of person that you are. You're acting outside of your character. Satan says, you are a loser. Of course you did that because you always will. You are always going to lose, and you're going to wind up living in a van down by the river because you are no good at anything, and you never will be. That's an attack on character, and that's what shame is. And we never want them to internalize that they're bad. We just want them to realize that choice they made, that attitude they have, or that action they took is not the way we're supposed to do it. So really be careful on that one. And then let's do a little recap and some encouragement here. So osmosis doesn't work, and I'll send you all this stuff. Osmosis doesn't work, and if you only get one thing, just be intentional. Where are your kids, where you're trying to get them to go, and just come up with a plan. And then you have to evaluate the plan. And if it's not working, you adjust. That's the key. If you can do that, you're going to be miles ahead. Parenting is job one. Great parents are coaches, not friends. And they have to be the real deal. You can't be one way at church and one way at home, because they're going to think it's a problem with church, not with you. Discipline is for your child. Don't want to withhold that blessing from your kids. And it's discipleship. It's not punishment. We're trying to get to their hearts. Mom and dad are not to be trifled with. And that's harder for moms usually. But mom must be respected, or the daytime's just going to be miserable. Got to have respect in the home. And we want to be strict and loving. And then the grid, the guilt part isn't shame. The guilt is saying, hey, you broke the agreement that we have come to, or you broke the rule, and because of that, that's why this is happening. But then we restore them, we inspire them, and then we try and disciple them. And that will keep their hearts open to you. And then the last thing is the horse trading, tantrums, and BOGO. You know this stuff's coming, so just get ready for it. Be preemptive. So all things work together for good for them that love God. I don't know where you are with your kids. And I know all of you have made mistakes because we are still making mistakes. But God gave you your children because he trusted you with them. He knew everything. He knew every single thing that was going to be thought and said in the future. And he says, these are the people I want to raise these precious children with. And he gave them to you because he trusts you. And that means that you are absolutely capable of doing it, no matter what mistakes you've made. And one thing is, if you have a wayward child, you never stop being a parent. And I know examples of kids who didn't talk to their parents for decades, but then they did, and they wound up having a sweet relationship. So there's tears and prayer in those circumstances, but you're never out of the game until one of you guys is dead. So you want to
And we wanted to leave you with one last thought after this talk. I want to help raise your eyes to a higher goal and purpose. You have no idea who you're raising. You see your little child, your little 2-year-old who's, like he said, throwing tantrums or throwing things or, chewing gum off of the slide. You see your 4-year-old, your 8-year-old boy that's starting to, pick fights with the kids at school. You see your 15-year-old who's being rebellious and missing curfew. You have no idea who you're raising. You may be raising the next senator of Montana. You may be raising the next president of the United States. You may be raising the person who will pastor you in your old age. You have no idea. And if you will begin looking at your sons and daughters from a different perspective, you will parent them completely different. I remind myself all the time, Cheryl, you have no idea where these boys are going to end up, what they're going to end up doing. So you go into your parenting with so much more respect and so much more grace and so much more privilege because you have no idea. And as a result, your children end up behaving in a totally different way than if you saw them just as some little scrawny teenager or some little rebellious 8-year-old who keeps getting into trouble and keeps annoying you and frustrating you. You will begin parenting your children with a completely different mindset, and as a result, a completely different result. So I want to encourage you, lift your eyes up and have a bigger vision for your children, because you never know, you may be raising your very next pastor.
Okay, so that's the first part, and we are doing well on time. So this is, we have a couple of options. One is we can do Q&A. The other is we can talk about technology, and I'm going to talk about some of the neurobiology, the stuff that goes on with your head, and why. Yes, I've been speaking for like 5 hours today. So we can talk about that, and the neurology is really, really important because it can't be stopped. Even when you know it's happening, you still can't stop it from happening. And so we can do Q&A, we can do a little bit of tech, or we can go all the way through some tech. And so I'm just curious, who wants to do, you guys just speak out, and please tell me, because if nobody says anything, I'm just going to choose for you. So, tech. Okay, a lot of tech, a little tech. You know what? Let me see if I'll go through the tech, and I'll be very disciplined. And so I won't exaggerate. I won't expound on anything. So let's see. Here we go.
And if y'all need to get up and go to the restroom, get water, he's going to go ahead and start the talk just because we are time constrained here. But feel free to get up, go exercise, do whatever.
Yep.
Stand in the back if you need some exercise.
You don't want to get a blood clot.
Do whatever you need to. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is called Dangerous by Design. And technology is literally dangerous by design. It was designed to be addictive. Smartphones hook people using the same neural pathways as gambling and drugs. That's Chris Marcelano. He's the guy who invented the technology that sends stuff to your phone. Okay? I feel tremendous guilt. I think we all knew in the back of our minds something bad could happen. that short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works. That's Chamath Palihapitiya, former VP of a Facebook growth, and he wrote that after somebody had posted in India on Facebook, the platform that he is trying to grow, that somebody had done something to a girl, and it wasn't true. But the people found out about it, and they killed the guy. And there was no questions. They just saw a Facebook post, and they killed him. And he says, what is going on here? So this kind of rocked his world. And then you have this one, and this is Sean Parker, the ex-president of Facebook, who now has a nonprofit to try and get kids off of social media. Okay, so he's the guy who started it, repented, and he's now trying to shut it down. Okay, it says social media platforms, Facebook, were designed to hook users. You're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. And I don't know if you know, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, their kids, they don't let their kids use tech. They don't let their kids use their own products. So we have both an incredible blessing and a curse in front of us. I remember navigating in downtown Chicago with a paper map at 18 years old. It was a nightmare, right? So technology is amazing, and yet at the same time, it is the biggest danger, I think, to our kids. And I'm going to skip through these. I'll hit just a couple. Majority of children regularly are battling anxiety. Teens and screens, the average time kids spend watching online videos has doubled in 4 years. And that's from 4 years ago. There's a war for your attention. You're losing it, and have smartphones destroyed a generation? And I am afraid if it hasn't destroyed this generation, I really am afraid it's going to destroy the next generation. It is very profound what's going on. And so let's talk a little bit about why this stuff is so addictive. And I'm going to talk about dopamine, the prefrontal cortex, and myelination. And there's way more to this story, but I'm only going to talk about 3. And I am not a neuroscientist. I've just read articles about this stuff. Okay? Dopamine is a chemical that your brain secretes, and it creates what's called like a feedback loop. And what it's designed to do is to get you to do a behavior again. It is 100% morally neutral. It doesn't care what you just did. It only cares if it worked, if it produced the results. And so the idea is it just gets you to redo it. And some people call it brain cookies. The problem is when you look at gaming, so the intense gaming that we now have, the amount of dopamine that goes through, that gets secreted in a person's brain is the same as sex. The same amount, okay? But the brain was not made to handle 7 or 8 or 9 hours of that. And so what happens is it goes, man, what is going on with all the dopamine? And so it starts shutting down the dopamine receptors and the ability to produce it. And so now your brain reacts to the excess dopamine by turning the faucet off. Well, you have to have some dopamine and you don't feel right. So now in order to get the same high that you got, you have to play more. And you can play more, and you can eventually get to the place where you can't feel normal until you've gotten that dopamine hit, and to get that dopamine hit requires hours and hours of intense gaming. So dopamine is a great thing, but it can really drive you to behaviors that you don't want. The prefrontal cortex, that's the part of the brain that's in the front, okay? That's this part up here, all right? But it's very important. The prefrontal cortex, what it does is addiction impairs what's called executive function, and that's basically you making decisions, attention, your ability to focus, to order things, and this is important, impulse control, to just say no. The prefrontal cortex does not fully develop in people until 20 and sometimes up to 25. And so what that means is your 14-year-old has a prefrontal cortex that has the I shouldn't do this because it's dumb or this is going to hurt me part that's not working very well. And that's why the only people you see jumping off of roofs or 3-story roofs into a hotel pool or onto a trampoline or all those videos, they're never 40-year-old men. Have you ever noticed that? Because like, I'm not doing that. That's crazy. But 16-year-olds, they don't have that. That this is a bad idea thing doesn't really fire for them. And when their body starts craving this dopamine and they've spent 8 hours on it and they feel awful physically from sitting still and all that sedentary lifestyle, but they just can't stop because their brain doesn't function the way it's supposed to by the time they're an adult. And then the last thing's called myelination. Myelination is like the insulation on a wire. Okay? If you have a bunch of wires together and there's problems and cuts and insulation missing, what do you get? If it's all a bunch of whole wires, electricity going through there, and the insulation's not working, you get shorts, right? It doesn't work right. So myelination is essentially a sheath. It goes through, it protects the brain, and it creates the ability for the neural pathways in your brain to fire quickly. And when myelination is working correctly, those pathways go, or the impulses go about 250 miles an hour. But when they're not, and when myelination has been disrupted, it slows down to 2.5 miles an hour in extreme cases. And so it's supposed to build these neural pathways so your brain fires fast. But the problem is myelination is a fairly delicate process. And one of the things, unfortunately, is flashing screens and excessive dopamine stimulation cut down on myelination process. And so you see that kid, and you can see it. The kid who's just addicted to gaming, they just seem slow and lethargic and heartless about everything else. But when you talk about that game, man, it lights up. They have burnt all of these neural pathways around that game and that gaming. So their brain is hyper-wired for this activity, but it's not wired up for the other activities. And this was, I'm going to skip through that. This was an amazing study. They took heroin addicts and they took gaming addicts, and they did brain scans of them, and they showed it to neurologists. And they says, who here is a heroin addict and who here is a gamer? And the neurologist could not tell the difference. The impact of gaming, the impact of heroin affected the brain in the same way, so that the neurologist couldn't tell the difference. And so we need to be careful with that. And everything I said about gaming goes with social media. Because the social media, that dopamine feedback loop, that's the whole like button. That's the most insidious and the most brilliant thing they ever came up with on Facebook. Because you post it, people put comments, you get a dopamine hit. Then people forward it, you get a dopamine hit. But then when they like it and they do a comment, you get a double dopamine hit. And then you get how many likes, how many likes, how many likes. That's the whole thing. And so gaming and social media have the same impact, except the one mostly affects boys, one mostly affects girls. So bottom line is children and teens, and all the teenagers always give me like devil eyes here. But children and teens do not have the neurobiological ability to handle the level of dopamine stimulation in modern games and social gaming. We can make great games. I was a computer programmer. I did that for 20 years. The technology and the ability to draw triangles, which is really the essence of making great games, we can do that millions and millions and millions of times a second. What they're trying to do is to create an environment that is psychologically, physiologically, and biologically addictive, because their goal is to keep you on their platform or on their game as long as possible. And even when you know this is happening, you can't stop it because you can't argue with biology. And that dopamine stimulation loop, and then all of a sudden it's cutting it down. Now I have to get more to get back to where I feel good. Super dangerous. And the games today, man, they are immersive. They're ginormous. You can explore all this stuff. They are so realistic. That is actually a Voltor charging handle with plastic M-Bus backup sights. It's a real gun. It's got real stuff, and it really works like a real gun. The problem is kids will do this, and if you ever gave them a real gun, a real AR, they think that you're reloaded by pushing the R button. Right? They have learned no real skills whatsoever, but they feel like they've accomplished something because they had a 20 or 30 person kill streak. And this is speaking to the heart of boys, especially boys, that they've accomplished something, and in reality they haven't. They've virtually accomplished nothing. Virtually they accomplish a game, but in reality they haven't accomplished anything. They don't know respiratory pause. They don't know what the pocket is. They don't know how to call wind. They know nothing about anything about shooting. They just get into this game and they just play it and play it and play it. And then they feel like men, and yet they haven't become manly at all. That's the thing. And it's not great. Young people who play violent video games change their brains. And the article is called Chronic Violent Video Game Exposure and Desensitization to Violence from the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. And I think I got one more. The more realistic, the greater the effect. I remember when those first-person shooters came out and you would hit somebody and they'd just go, and it just looked fake and they'd fall over backwards like it was a toy. Now you hit it and it looks very, very real and it's very, very graphic. And it looks like anatomy is the way that anatomy would really respond. And this is from, this is the article, Effects of Realism. And listen to the title, Effects of Realism on Extended Violent and Non-Violent Video Game Play on Aggressive Thoughts, Feelings, and Physiological Arousal from the Journal of Aggressive Behavior. I mean, who knew they had a journal of aggressive behavior? But playing lots and lots of violent video games does affect you. There's a difference, though. I still play first-person shooters. I came up in the era of the very first PCs. And I got one, and I played video games, and I was a 20-year-old guy, and I played them. And every once in a while, I still do, just for fun. But the thing is, I play it for 15 minutes. And I say, I'll play one more. And then I stop after 15 minutes. But when I was 20, I ordered a game one day, installed it in the evening, sun was still up, played it, and then I realized, my gosh, I am starving. I look up, it's 11:30. I played from 5 in the afternoon to 11:30. I ate some cold chicken because I didn't want to heat it up. I want to get back to the game. I said, well, I'm just going to play a little bit more. And I keep playing. And the next thing I notice, I look around, I'm like, man, the room looks weird. And I pull open the drapes, and the sun was up. I did not know it. I played all night long and did not know it. But my prefrontal cortex was not developed, and I just got sucked into that thing. And this is what happens. So gaming, on average, a 20-year-old has played 10,000 hours, and that is more than it takes to get a bachelor's degree. Not sure that's a great use of time. I'm not bashing video games, okay? But you can do it too much. Teen texting, and these are old numbers, I don't have updated numbers, average is 3,339 plus per month, or roughly 100 to 167 texts a day, or 6 to 9 an hour. No wonder they can't concentrate in school. And this was super interesting. Distraction, and so we got a couple of teens in here. Distractions while you're trying to do your homework is a terrible idea. This is what they did. It was the University of Missouri, and it was a distraction test to see how it impacted memorization. And what they were trying to do is memorize words on a list, and while they were doing that, they had just this little keys, and they had to put letters in the right order. So they're memorizing, and they're just checking the keys, memorizing, check the keys, order the stuff. Now, what's interesting is the actual memorization, it only dropped about 9 to 26%. So when they finished, they're like, oh yeah, I did a pretty good job on this. But here's the problem. When they actually tried to recall it, their recall ability dropped by 46 to almost 60%. And so what happens is we have teens, and they're trying to work distracted, so they're trying to read and watch YouTube, or read and listen to music and watch YouTube, and they read through it, and they feel like they've learned it because the memorization part feels like it's going right, but the recall part has dropped dramatically. On top of that, the time to get stuff done can be anywhere from 25 to 400% more. And while you're doing that, our brains and our bodies are not made for constant stimuli. And so what happens is our body releases adrenaline and cortisol. And that is not good for you. It's not good for weight gain. Adrenaline's not good for you. Constantly flushing into your body. So here's a couple of things. And so we'll be done here in a minute. These are questions to watch and things to look for. Are they staying up later and later on the computer? Okay. Are they anxious or fidgety without their device? If they're like, where's my phone? Where's my phone? Man, I hate my phone, honestly. I'm like, you can't get away from the thing, and like you're just constantly available. There's times where I just wish I could just focus on what I'm doing and not have the phone go off. Less interested in school, friends, and activities. Well, social media and gaming replaces friends and activities. Is virtual imagery in their heads? And that's like little kids are the ones who will say this, not the big kids. They'll say, and Roblox was a great example. I saw Roblox. I thought, that is the lamest thing I've ever seen in my life. But Microsoft bought it for like $1 billion. Right? It's the biggest video game on the planet. But little kids, they're like, whoa, I can't get the video games out. And I can't remember the name of the syndrome. But if you play enough Roblox, for this example, the guy gave the example of this. He goes, I had a client, and he would feel anxiety when he was out in the real world because the trees weren't the way they're supposed to be, as in they were round and green as opposed to square. And it caused anxiety for the guy. And I can't remember the name of what that was, but they rewired like what a tree looks like, because they played so much Roblox that now it's like when they see a real tree, it's like, wait, this doesn't match up. Now, I don't know how much they played, but it was a lot. Are they hiding devices or their device usage? That's a huge problem. Are they having trouble regulating their emotions? That's a problem. Are they more apathetic and easily bored? That's a product of dopamine overstimulation, and stuff just starts. It gets to the place where throwing a football used to be a great pastime, but it can't compete with 3 hours of Call of Duty in terms of dopamine stimulation, right? This is a pleasant activity. The other one's exhilarating. And if the only thing you can do is exhilarating, well, everything else in comparison is no longer exhilarating. Everything drops, and so now everything seems bland. Are they perpetually wired but tired? Are they falling asleep at school? Do they have joint or back pain, headaches, eye problems? And one of the things that's actually coming out is because a lot of these kids are scrolling all night or gaming all night, they're getting referred for ADHD and say, hey, you've got ADHD symptoms. But in a lot of cases, just getting 2 weeks of good sleep will get rid of those symptoms, because lack of sleep deprivation presents as ADHD in some kids. So what do? Well, Gabb phone is one. There are a ton of great phones out now that don't have internet access or have it where you can completely monitor it, which keeps your kids safe, but it's still, you know what, you can make phone calls on it. Imagine that. You can talk to a person live with their voice on a device. Kids don't even know that you can do that with a phone. And there's a ton of them. And our takeaways with all this stuff and the gaming and the social media, it's not a willpower problem. This is a biology, physiology. They're wired to get to this place. And the longer we let them do it, the harder it gets. And the addiction actually isn't the problem. The addiction to this stuff is the answer. They're trying to get away from, or they're trying to get something. And what they're using is social media. What they're using is gaming. And it's filling a need for them, a genuine, real human need that isn't being met, but it feels like it's being met. Unfortunately, it's got side effects. So for us, and especially with boys, I'll talk about gaming, all boys want to dominate, almost all boys. They want to test their mettle against other men or boys. If they lose, they're inspired to get up and try again. And we have to give boys that experience. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be martial arts. It can be the computer club. It can be chess. It can be 4-H, whatever that is. But we need to give them something that's a viable alternative to Call of Duty. Because boys need that. It's part of their wiring. So here's a couple guidelines, and then we'll be able to do some QA questions. For us, I would say no dopamine type rush games for little ones at all. And honestly, I wouldn't give a little kid a phone or an iPad until they're at least about 12. Really, I would never do that. I don't think they can handle it. Nothing that rewards them for logging in each day. Because a lot of games, they just get you to say, hey, if you log in a 7-day streak, then you get 50 coins or whatever that is. My boys wanted to play some of those games. No game that had that structure would we let them play because it's designed to get them to log in every day. No money for in-game upgrades. True story, some guy in China, I don't know what happened, he found a bank account and he spent all of the money to buy in-game upgrades. And so he bought all these games and he spent a ton of money only to find out that that was his college fund. He spent his college fund on like a video game by accident. True story. And there's apps that cover your tracks. Snapchat, Instagram, there's calculators and stuff like that. They're specifically designed to send a message, then it disappears. So you can send anything you want, pictures, images, whatever you want, and then it disappears. We don't want our kids to have those, obviously. And I don't really like this one. I wrote it down because I got this from an article. But it says 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, and 1 week a year, no screens. I would be more inclined to say 2 hours a day you get screens than 1 hour a day you don't get screens. And we used to do, we used to do Tech No Christmas. So we go all of December with no video games. And the first 3 days, everybody's in withdrawal. But by then, you know what? They start doing puzzles. They start playing games. They start throwing a football. And it's just a calm Christmas without everybody like this. So we do the techno fasts. No screens at meals. You guys have seen the couples at dinner, right? And they're both on their phones. Doesn't it break your heart? Like, why are you spending $50 or $80 to watch your phone? Just get a pizza, right? It'd be a lot easier. No screens on dates without mutual consent. That's a rule Cheryl and I have. And devices need to go to bed. So, man, you do not want your kid to have a phone in bed. You don't want your boys taking the phone into the bathroom, right? You don't want any of that kind of stuff. They should go to bed, and I think you should put the devices should go to bed like 8 or 9 if your kids go to bed at 10 or 11. So it's like there is a time where my body is designed to wind down. I'm not looking at blue light. I'm not looking at anything that's stimulating because you have to get a circadian rhythm because kids are sleep deprived now. Car times, conversation time. It's awesome. You have a captive audience. And you can say, how was school today? And they say, fine. And say, no. I need at least 2 paragraphs about what happened today at school, right? You got a captive audience. So talk and engage with your kids. Parentings, they should inspect all devices. So you paid for it, and so you should inspect them. You should go through text message. You should look at internet history. You should look at YouTube history. You should look at everything. You should look for strange apps that show up. It's like, what does this app do? Because they have apps that are calculators, but it's not a calculator. It's a portal to places you really don't want to go. But it looks like a calculator, works like a calculator, but if you type in one code in a pattern, it's a whole nother thing. And they're designed to trick you. And phones are phones, not alarm clocks. And no screens before double digits. That's really what we recommend. Spouses, Cheryl has my passwords to everything. She has passwords to everything. We all have internet stuff. All of our internet devices are monitored. And there's reports, so everything gets logged. So we have it on every device. And we log our children onto their... Oh, that's when they were little. And then we have significant consequences for violations. I doubt that anybody here has a kid with a phone that doesn't have any type of monitoring on it. But this is the analogy that I use. And let me see if it's the next picture. Yeah. Every single device in your house that isn't monitored, that has free internet access, is the same as having a rattlesnake in your house. Do rattlesnakes always bite? No, they do not. They're pretty shy. They rarely bite. But would anybody here be living to live with even one rattlesnake loose in their house? No chance. But most of us would have 7 to 8 rattlesnakes in our house, right? Because we got 5, 6, 7, 8 devices. And so you're going to get bit if you don't have something to protect our kids. So I don't know if anybody has that, but that's how we describe it. And so here's the way we think about technology. It's like donuts. Would you give your kid 15 or 20 donuts a day? No. Who would show up? If CPS found out about that, they would come and take your kids. You can't feed your kids 25 donuts a day and not feed them a decent meal, right? It's illegal. It's immoral. So we don't want to do that. And so I look at technology and social media as something that, you know what, this is a treat. It's not a right. And you get to do it sometimes and within reason. And we have strict monitoring and filtering on how much of this you get to ingest into your lives and your mind. So that's basically it, what we have for technology. Oh, here we go, last one. Bruce Alexander did a study. In the 80s, I think it was, and I think I remember this from my childhood, I can't remember 70s or 80s. They did a study of cocaine and how addictive it was. And what they found out after doing these studies, because they tested them on rats, is that cocaine in these rats was literally like 100% addictive. Anyway, and what they did is you had water, you had cocaine, and the rats could choose what they wanted, and they could have food, whatever it was, and all the rats got hopelessly addicted to cocaine. The problem was it didn't mimic reality, because when humans take cocaine, it's not 100% addictive. It's not even close, okay, to where people just deathly addicted to cocaine. And so Bruce Alexander says, man, I think there's something wrong with the experiment. So he starts looking into the details. And the way they did that experiment is they took one rat, put it in a cage, and gave it the ability to have this or cocaine. And what happened is all of the rats alone in their cages all chose cocaine. He says, well, rats are social animals. I think I'm going to make like Rat Disneyland. So he did. He called it Rat Park. And it had everything rats love to do. So it had places they could hide, wheels. It was rats, male and female, living together, doing what rats like to do, right? It was just Disney World for rats. And what they found out is when the rats were living in community, the rat population where it got addicted mimicked the same results they were getting from humans. And his conclusion from the experiment was this. He says, without healthy socialization and connection, a rat seemed to be much more vulnerable to addiction. And his overall conclusion that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection. And so when the rats had the rats had community and friends and activities, cocaine had very little draw, or it didn't have the draw that it did. But if they were alone, isolated and stuck with just themselves, that was the best thing going, and they all got addicted. So for our kids, we can't tell them you got to stop doing this without replacing it. So we got to give them something that they can replace it with. So that's kind of it for that's the quick version of the Tech Talk. So do you guys want to do some Q&A real quick? We got about 10-15 minutes. And thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's 2 hours, and so everybody's tired and it's Sunday night. So questions, comments, or complaints? Yes.
Can you elaborate more on horse training and how you would handle it for a toddler? Because I know you said you took him to Barnes & Noble, took him home to Spangum, took him back, did the same thing again. But like, I don't know, our child seems to be real whiny, and so then we try to discipline him, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse. So I don't know what we're not doing or doing that we can do better.
Sure. You got.
I think I would really begin praying and saying, Lord, what is it does this child need? Because you did tell me that another child was born not too long ago. Is that right?
They're 14 months apart.
14 months apart. So there may be a need. Children are naturally happy and, just content, peppy, happy, bursting with love. And so a child there may be a need that's going unmet, especially if they're whining and complaining a lot. It seems like they're trying to get attention. So maybe what you could do is spend a little bit more time with them, looking in their eyes, and they're talking to them, reading books, and see if that kind of takes away some of the discipline issues. So once again, that may be preventive. Maybe in this case, you need a little more prevention. Maybe he needs just a little bit extra love and time and attention. So that would be something to consider. Maybe you've already done that, but that is something to consider. Because sometimes we immediately think, oh, he's got an issue, character issue, we need to discipline, when sometimes it's just a cry for, please notice me, I feel completely left out and alone, and there's some needs, there's some things going on in my heart that I feel broken in. So I would just pray and ask the Holy Spirit to reveal what that might be.
Other questions? Yes.
So when it comes to, like, I guess punishment, for me when I was a kid, I would either get a spanking or grounded. Like, what is your guys' take on the grounding per se?
Oh, well, first off, I wouldn't think of it as punishment. I'd think of it as discipleship, right? And I think grounding's a fantastic idea. And so for you don't have to spank, but for some types of offenses, that works. But as kids get older, obviously you can't spank your 15-year-old, right? I think grounding's great, restricting privileges. But just grounding a kid for an offense may not necessarily be the best idea. It would be better, instead of let's say you told him to rake the leaves, and he didn't rake the leaves. It wouldn't make sense to ground him, because the consequence has nothing to do with the offense. You want to try and make whatever is the disciplinary action tied somehow to what actually didn't happen. So in that case, they would be on yard duty for 2 weeks. So they're in charge of the yard. It's got to be clean and green. I don't want to see a leaf on that thing ever for 2 solid weeks. That would be a better type punishment. But if they are constantly missing curfew, or they told you they're going one place and you find out they went another place, well, then grounding would be perfect, because now they're abusing their freedom to travel. So that's a good thing. The punishment should fit the crime, and the punishment, I think, should resemble the crime. So you don't want to overdo it, you don't want to underdo it, and it's best if it's like, it's really discipleship. You are actually training them. So if he doesn't do the leaves, you're giving him lots of leaf practice, right? It's good for him.
Something to think about, too, is if you look in Scripture for biblical examples, when a sheep would stray, I don't know if y'all have heard these stories, but the shepherd would break his little legs and then put him on top of his shoulders.
Yeah, we've done
Do
that
you
several
remember
times.
And so I think the analogy is when you discipline, we have done this over and over again, you bring them close. So you discipline, you bring them close. You discipline, you bring them close. And I mean, it's very, you can see that with the shepherds. When he was taking care of the sheep, he broke their little legs and then he carried them on his shoulders because they had strayed off. And what it taught is it taught that little sheep, closeness to the shepherd is better than the strain. And the consequences is worse, and the reward is better of staying close.
Yeah.
So,
There have been times when I've disciplined some of our kids, or one of the boys, and then actually took them out for ice cream after, because I wanted to make sure that they didn't feel that there's a separation, especially if you have a kid that's really prone to shame or self-condemnation. And so it's you want to keep their hearts close.
and that boy still talks about that to this day,
Yep,
how much
yep.
that meant to him.
Oh, there's another thing on that. This has also worked well. Had an incident, and I think it was Michael, and he did something, and he knew he wasn't supposed to do it. But I think we'd probably been, he was hard to raise, and so we'd been doing a bunch of stuff, and he was getting in trouble quite a bit. And I said, Michael, you know you're supposed to get disciplined for this, right? He said, yeah. Michael, he says, I'm not going to. I'm not going to discipline you, but it was wrong, and you know it was wrong. What I'm going to give you today is grace. And that's because that's what God gives us. So we don't always do the right thing, but God gives us grace. And I want you to know that this is how God treats us. But I also want to know that you better not abuse this, because next time you're not going to get grace, you're going to get justice. But today you get grace because God is gracious with your dad, He's gracious with your mom, He's gracious with us. And I want you to grow up thinking that God is going to drop the hammer every single time you make a mistake, because that's not how God is. He's patient, He's gentle.
I think love is spelled Time. So a lot of times we can prevent a child acting out because that acting out is just to get your attention. So be preventive. Question over here? Yes.
Can you speak to horse training in relation to older teenagers, like 17 or 18, so one is almost out?
Can you give us an example without betraying anything?
They do a lot of fighting amongst them.
Yes. You ready? Okay, this actually happened to us. We worked it. Cheryl alluded to it earlier. Michael, my oldest, and my middle son, now they weren't 16, but this would work with 16s. They were younger, but what we did is for 72 hours, they were not allowed to be more than an arm length apart. And that's what we did. And did you ever see the meme of the kid that says, I can't get along, and it's the two heads sticking out of dad's t-shirt, right? I was like, that's actually a really good idea. And so we did that with Lucas and Michael. And the only exception was if one of them went to the bathroom, the other one had to stand outside the bathroom at the door waiting for them to come out. And they spent 72 hours like this. Now, on the third day, we knew we could stop because it's horse training, so you have to do it till it's done. On the third day, we would hear them negotiating. And one would say, hey, I want to do this. And says, well, we did what you wanted to do last time. So, oh, you're right. Okay, well, we'll do what you want to do. What do you want to do? Well, I want to do this. It says, well, how about if you do this for a while, we do this, and then we do this? It says, okay, who wants to go first? I'm like, bingo. That is what we want. They have learned how to live in peace, to disagree, and to come to an agreement. And that was about the end of the bickering. So for the older kids, I think you can do almost the exact same thing. You guys will be together in each other's presence until you can get along. And we're starting at 3 days or 2 days, whatever you think that would work. If that doesn't work, call me, but I'll bet you it will. So, any other questions on that? That's a good question. Okay.
I have that video too if you want to watch that video.
Oh, the gift of no? Yeah, let's go ahead and show that. This is great.
Yeah, my kids think I'm really cool. You know how cool my kids think I am? You know what their nickname is for me at home? Dr. No. Dr. No. You know why? Because I give them a lot of no. A lot of kids get too much yes. I give them no. I call it the gift of no. Parents, it's easy. Daddy, can I have that? No. Can I have the keys to the car? Let me check here. No. Can I go over there? Nope. Can I spend the night over there? This old man, he said no. Get creative, man. Eeny, meeny, miny, no. Now you're just somebody that I used to. No. There are so many fun ways to say no.
Oh, you know what? There's more to that video, so that's a short one. Because what he goes on and explains, he goes, I'm not your friend. I'm your dad. And that's why I tell you no, because I love you, because I'm not your friend. So I wish that there's other versions of that.
So in conclusion, parenting is messy work. It is messy work. You're going to make a lot of mistakes. We have made, this is birthed out of all the mistakes we've made. But just like Michelangelo, they have the story about him where he would paint the Sistine Chapel. And at the end of the day, he would have mud all over him and paint. And as he was walking out, sometimes they would kick him out because they wouldn't know that he was actually the one painting because he looked so filthy and so disgusting. And that's how it is as a parent. Some days you feel like you are building this amazing masterpiece, but you've got mud slung all over you. You feel like a failure, and you feel like you need to kick yourself out of the castle or out of the chapel. Well, I want you to know that you are holding eternity in your hands. You really genuinely are. And you are doing a mighty, powerful, amazing work for eternity. And so my question to you, our question to you, is how are you molding your child's heart for the glory of God and for eternity? We hopefully gave you some tools. And hopefully you will take this and begin creating a plan and sit and discuss with your husband or your wife how you're going to begin implementing some of these strategies and techniques. And I want you to know that eternity will only tell. But like we talked about already, you may be raising the next president, the next senator, the next pastor, another mother who will raise up, 10 grandchildren for the glory of God, who will go all over the world as missionaries and pastors and teachers. And so you have an amazing job, and God wants to use you in an amazing way for your family. So be encouraged. Even though it gets messy, you're doing amazing, incredible work. So we want to pray for you all, and then thank you for your time and your avid attention. We appreciate you all so much. So let's pray.
Wait, before we pray. I will send you everything we did tonight. Noah? Hey, would it be possible to put that QR code back up on the screen? There we go. So if you guys want to take a picture of that, that will take you to the sign-up page, and I'll know from today's date that it was you guys, and I'll send you the outline for the discipline, the parents who think, the best thinking parents, and then also the tech stuff. So I'll send it all to you, so you can take it there, or we've got sign-up sheets down here. And if you do that, we'll also send you an ebook that I think you guys will enjoy.
Okay, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this precious time that we had together. These parents are so intentional. I can tell they care so much about their family and their children. The fact that they've come out again on a Sunday night when it's difficult, it's dark and cold, and they're tired. And Lord, they are willing to lay down their life. And I pray that you bless them abundantly for the sacrifices that they've made. I pray that you give them a greater vision for their life, a greater vision for their parenting. When they feel like giving up, when they're discouraged, I pray that you will remind them that they have eternity in their hands, and that they have the opportunity to mold the next generation who will grow up and go into the world and make an incredible impact, and that that child will rise up and call them blessed. And so I pray that you give them hope, you give them encouragement, you give them patience, you give them self-control, and that as they model these fruits of the Spirit, that their family home life will begin to change one character trait, one fruit of the Spirit at a time, and that each child will grow up and will become masterpieces that you used each parent to mold into your shape, into your glory and your image. And we thank you, Lord, for this privilege and opportunity to meet together. In the name of Jesus, amen and amen.
Man, thank you guys.